The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept it, and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata, and realizing it, making it real in our life. I mean, it is real, but having it expressed in everything we do or say or think, so that our activity, our speech, our thoughts all align with what we realize in our zazen. And that's an ongoing process. It's quite an ongoing process, lifetimes really. And that's quite wonderful that we have a chance to practice even in one lifetime. So today is day 5 of this October 2020 session, 7-day session here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. And for the last couple of days, I've been speaking about the pervasive anxiety that's been rampant in the world and in the lives of many, many people, probably most people, and how it can even be in just about everyone's life at subtle levels. And it's an anxiety about dying, really. If we make a mistake, are we going to be punished in such a way that it'll feel like dying? We're well trained in this conditioning, and even into adulthood, it follows us, despite the fact that we may know differently. Still, up here we know differently, but does our body know differently? And I mentioned also Tori Angie, who was Hakuin's principal Dharma successor, and who was a deeply realized human being and spent 40 years teaching. He encountered, I probably knew Buddhism from the get-go because I suspect he was born into a Buddhist family, given that at age 5 he met a Buddhist priest and was so struck by this man that when he was 9, he entered Buddhist training. And we don't know whether it was Zen training or some other form. There's a lot of Buddhism, and not all of it is Zen meditation. There's sutra study and a whole wide range of practices that don't come under the Zen specific umbrella. But he ended up at 17 becoming ordained by the very priest that he had met when he was 5. And not long after that, had a Kensho experience, a rather deep one apparently, and practiced a few more years with Master Zensai. And then Zensai suggests that he go and train with Hakuin at Shoinji, which he did. He was in his early 20s at that point, and he had another deeper awakening experience under Hakuin. He stayed with Hakuin for several years until he heard that his mother was ill, and then he returned to his home province in Kyushu and took care of his mother for a couple of years until she died. And after that, he went into a solo retreat in the mountains of Kyoto, it sounds like. And this was a very austere retreat. He practiced mightily. And it was in, of course, very damp Japan, where cold and damp made it very easy to get tuberculosis. And apparently he did. He was in that retreat for many, many months and emerged sick, but with a very deep awakening experience, and decided that if he was going to die, he was going to die, but perhaps it would be helpful to write down what he understood about Zen practice. And I'd like to share with you from this excellent book, Discourse on the Inexhaustible Lamp, translated by Myokyoni, with comments by D5 Zenji. D5 Zenji was a Rinzai master in the 20th century. And it's published by Zen Center London. And let's see if we can find the right page, because there's so many places here that I have noted that this is Master D5's forward. Let's get to, and Myokyoni's forward. Now where is, hold on a second, I have to find this commentary by him, where he tells all about this. Forward by Master D5. Okay, in Tori's introduction, though I had completed the training, in other words, it sounds like he'd done his koan training. Our Zen training is really beginningless and endless. If we're really to come to awakening. And so when he says he'd completed the training, he means that he had completed the koan curriculum under Hakuin. He says, though I had completed the training and come to maturity, I had not yet attained freedom in the old master's wonder-arousing, mysterious state behind the differentiations. So I went into the retreat at the west side of Kyoto's Shirakara River, and there practiced austerities day and night for more than 100 days. What I had vowed had already been attained. In other words, he had had deep awakening experiences, multiple. But I nevertheless continued heedlessly, and with my efforts exceeding all caution, the 5 organs were overstrained and I fell seriously ill. I did my best to effect a cure, but to no avail. The disease had got worse, and 3 times I was laid down suffering as if all the illnesses of the world afflicted me. Off and on it lasted for 3 years. The doctor wrung his hands and said, even if you should recover, you have only a few more years to live. This made me think. It was not that I held my own life dear. It is not that I held my own life dear. In other words, he was not afraid of dying and would have no regrets. It was not that I held my own life dear, but I could not resign myself to not having accomplished the vow to benefit myself and others, and that all my efforts and sufferings had been in vain. Pondering, I remembered Master Choho, who wrote a treatise while awaiting execution. This is an ancient Chinese situation. Master Choho, who had enough of a reputation as a fine teacher that the emperor of the day summoned him to teach at the palace. And what Choho realized was that teaching in the palace was going to be teaching a bunch of people who were not necessarily very interested in practice. And in doing so, he would be abandoning his serious students. And he felt that he couldn't do that. And so his reply was, no, thank you. This enraged the emperor. And he said, you come or execution. So he said, well, I can't abandon my students. I will not come. And so he was told that he was to report for execution. And he asked for a reprieve of a week or 2 weeks, I don't remember which it was, during which he would write everything he understood about Zen practice and awakening for the benefit of his students. And that was granted. And at the end of that period of time, having written all of this down, he presented himself to be executed. And the common form of execution in China, even into the 20th century, was to have your head sliced off with a sword. And as he bent down, ready to be executed, he said something. He made a poem, something about the blade slicing through my neck will be no different than the sound of the spring wind, or the sigh of the spring wind. And he was executed. Hagiography tells us that instead of blood gushing out of his arteries, came milk. Anyway, Master Choho died without any suffering, without any regret, without any anxiety, without any fear. Are we ready to do that? Inspired by this, Tori decided that he would write. Pondering, I remembered Master Choho, who wrote a treatise while awaiting execution. Deciding to follow his example, I started writing this treatise. Though bedbound, I kept brush and ink by my side and wrote whenever I could. Within just 30 days, the rough copy was ready, and I called it the Inexhaustible Lamp of our school, showing how from one lamp, hundreds of thousands of lamps are kindled, inexhaustible from one to the other. After that, I became calm, spending my remaining days sitting up or lying down as my condition demanded. Occasionally, there came days when I felt better, and after 6 months, I knew by myself I would live. I had decided that in case I should not recover, I would have this treatise presented to the Roshi, who was Hakuin. If parts of it were judged worth keeping, it might act as an incentive for later students. If not, I would ask for it to be burnt. But as I now was certainly recovering and in the process of regaining normal health, I wondered what use there was for such dead tangles. I was about to burn it myself, but just then I received a kind letter from the Roshi telling me to come and see him. After having seen him in the Sun-Zen room, we talked, and this treatise was mentioned. The master looked through it and told me that it would be useful for later students and I was not to burn it, so I kept it stored away for a long time. Now, upon repeated requests from various followers, I was obliged to give in and agree to have it published. But written words can be a source of entanglement as well as of liberation. Unless the right person takes it at the right time, the elixir turns to poison. Please be careful and do not take another's insight as your own. If you deviate from this stern injunction, you miss my intention. On account of my protracted illnesses, I was unable to do any revision. How could such a book become a standard text? Time will decide. And he wrote that in September 1750. And here we can read it today in 2020. Tori was deeply realized and quite free. Hakuin kept trying to rope him into teaching, and periodically he would resist. But apparently he did spend 40 years teaching at Ryutakuji, which is still, as far as I know, an ongoing teaching temple in the Rinzai sect. I visited there back in the 1990s at some point, and they were in the midst of sesshin. You could hear the keisako thwacking, and there are current teachers in America who have trained there as well. So what I'd like to share with you now is what is known as Tori Angie's Bodhisattva vow. As part of his teaching, he was very emphatic about what he termed the long maturation. And that is, it does not have to begin with Kensho. It can begin way before Kensho. And it is about, as we gain insight, as we practice, and even small insights before we would have what would be deep enough to call a Kensho, we begin to see more clearly. And what we begin to see more clearly is how we are behaving, how our thoughts are tied into greed, anger, and delusion, how our behavior is tied into greed, anger, and delusion, and how we didn't even realize it. And yet, there it unfolds. And it's about changing those habit patterns so that we don't continue to behave in ways that are less than skillful, less than compassionate, less than wise. So, oh, good heavens. I apologize for that. Anyway, I'd like to share Tori Angie's Bodhisattva vow, and every morning we chant it here. It's a recipe for both an enlightened view and working to manifest it. Disciples, when I humbly observe the true nature of things, all are the marvelous manifestation of the Tathagata's truth. Atom by atom, instant by instant, all are none other than this mysterious radiance. And you remember that Chinol, that Korean master of great note, spoke of tracing down the radiance to its source. Turn the light inward and trace the radiance down to its source. And that's our first part of this instruction, is to really open to increasingly subtle levels of perception. And perception comes not necessarily from our eyes or ears or our head. It can come from our body. It can come from many different sources. And you may have heard that in Zen there's an expression to hear with your eyes and see with your ears. That's a good recommendation, because we're accustomed to seeing in certain ways and hearing in certain ways. But isn't that colored by habit? Isn't that colored by cultural perception? What's the real truth? What's the absolute reality of this very moment? When you're hearing my voice or seeing me on the computer screen, what is the reality of this moment? How does it feel in your body? And who are you? How do you know that it's you, whoever that is, feeling? Because of this, our virtuous ancestors extended loving care and reverence toward even such beings as birds and beasts. As we open more completely to the truth, there's a natural upwelling of compassion, of acceptance, and we begin to respond to natural beings with care, with an expression of love, really, unconditional acceptance. How then can we be but humbly grateful for the food, drink, and clothing that nourishes and protects us throughout the day? These being, in essence, the warm skin and flesh of the great masters, the incarnate compassion of the Buddha. If it is so even with inanimate objects, how much more should we be kind and merciful towards human beings, even those who are foolish? And this is a real tricky one. This is probably the most difficult thing for people to manifest. If it is so even with inanimate objects, how much more should we be kind and merciful towards human beings, even those who are foolish, though they become our sworn enemies, reviling and persecuting us? We should regard them as bodhisattvas, bodhisattva manifestations, who in their great compassion are employing skillful means to help emancipate us from the painful karma we have produced over countless kalpas through our biased, self-centered views. There is the old story of the rabbi who for 20 years was heckled by a member of his congregation. Every time he would stand up to speak in the synagogue, this man would stand up and heckle him. And finally, the man died. And so the other members of the congregation said, "Phew, aren't you grateful that this guy is gone? Now you can speak in peace." And the rabbi said, "Actually, no. I considered him my great friend because he showed me where I was caught, where I needed to work, where I needed to become more humble, where I needed to become more grateful, where I needed to let go, where I needed to become more compassionate and wise." And so it is, we can take those words seriously. Are there people in your life that are challenging to be around, to interact with? People that you'd rather not have to deal with? There's your wonderful opportunity to open more completely, to let go more completely, to become even more liberated. Because every human being is trying to do their very best in the only way they know. And given our world and all that's in it, there's a tremendous amount of suffering. And there's a tremendous amount of trauma. It's estimated that almost 75% of children are traumatized. Abandonment is one of the biggest ones, and abandonment can be not that you're left on the street somewhere in a box, but that within your own family unit, you have become invisible. You're maybe basically taken care of, fed, clothed, bathed, but the nurturing, the hugging, the compassion isn't there. Excuse me, I don't know what is tickling my throat right now, but it is. And when we grow up like that, we compensate for that loss, and we try to be the best people we can. And so we act in ways that maybe are not so comfortable for other people around us. For a long time, we had a member at Hidden Valley Zen Center who unfortunately died. I think he was 49 years old when he died. He was morbidly obese and died of a heart attack. When he came to us, two of our members said to me, either he goes or I will go. I'm not willing to be in this place with this guy. He's loud, he's noisy, he seems aggressive, and indeed he was, although there was clearly such a level of compassion behind all of that for him. And as he continued to stay, because that was important, both for his sake and for the sake of the Sangha, because here was a Bodhisattva manifestation who in his great compassion was offering us all a chance to let go more. As time went on, he became more and more quiet inwardly and outwardly, less and less defensive. It turns out that he was abused by both his parents when he was a kid. And on top of that, there were drugs in the family. In fact, his parents were put in federal prison when he was in high school. I think he was 17 years old, when both his parents ended up in federal prison for transporting drugs up from Mexico. I don't know anything more than that about it, but so this is the kind of life he grew up in. When he died, at his funeral, his aunt said, when he came here, he became the man he was always meant to be. And that really was true. The acceptance that he experienced from increasingly all of us, the two who had objected to his being there stayed, and he did unfold into the wonderfully compassionate human being that he was. And his Buddhist name translates as a source of compassion. We each have opportunities. I'd be surprised if there wasn't somebody somewhere in the life of all of you who maybe was a difficult person, maybe even an abuser. But this is not to excuse that negative behavior, but it is about how we are able to perceive it and work with it. It's not about writing it off as Pollyanna would. Oh, well, they're just trying to, they're just teaching us, which is unfortunately the excuse that some Zen teachers have used to abuse their students. And that's not correct, because the impact is there. The damage is there. But we can use what we experience to grow from it. And this is actually quite known now, that trauma can become a jumping off place for deeper wisdom and a more enlightened life. And it can be. So back to Tori. Again, disciples, when I humbly observe the true nature of things, all are the marvelous manifestation of the Tathagata's truth. The Tathagata, of course, is the Buddha. And manifestation of the Tathagata's truth, the expression of awakening. Atom by atom, instant by instant, all are none other than this mysterious radiance. Because of this, our virtuous ancestors extended loving care and reverence toward even such beings as birds and beasts. How then can we be but humbly grateful for the food, drink, and clothing that nourishes and protects us throughout the day? These being, in essence, the warm skin and flesh of the great masters, the incarnate compassion of the Buddha. If it is so even with inanimate objects, how much more should we be kind and merciful towards human beings, even those who are foolish? Though they become our sworn enemies, reviling and persecuting us, we should regard them as Bodhisattva manifestations who in their great compassion are employing skillful means to help emancipate us from the painful karma we have produced over countless kalpas through our biased, self-centered views. And of course, if you experienced abuse as a child, the karmic aspect of that is only that you got yourself born into that particular family. So it's not the common assumption that you deserved it. That has nothing to do with karma. And it's important to recognize that. If we awaken in ourselves this deep, pure faith, offering humble words and taking sincere refuge in our true nature, then with every thought there will bloom a lotus flower, each with a Buddha. That's, of course, a metaphor for the fact that when we take refuge in the truth, when we open to our innate compassion and wisdom, then what we do and say and think becomes a source of positivity in the world. It's as if there's a little Buddha there. And really, there is. You're the Buddha. And so is the recipient, no matter what quality that recipient seems to have. These Buddhas will establish pure lands everywhere and reveal the radiance of the Tathagata beneath our very feet. May we extend this mind throughout the universe so that we and all sentient beings may equally bring to fruition the seeds of wisdom. So once more, disciples, when I humbly observe the true nature of things, all are the marvelous manifestation of the Tathagata's truth. Atom by atom, instant by instant, all are none other than this mysterious radiance. Because of this, our virtuous ancestors extended loving care and reverence toward even such beings as birds and beasts. How then can we be but humbly grateful for the food, drink, and clothing that nourishes and protects us throughout the day? These being, in essence, the warm skin and flesh of the great masters, the incarnate compassion of the Buddha. If it is so even with inanimate objects, how much more should we be kind and merciful towards human beings, even those who are foolish? And again, I think most of you have heard about the encounter between Do-san, who was, as he was known back then, Mitra-roshi, eventually at Shofukuji when he was a head monk and managing a detail of the Sangha workers just outside the main gate of the temple, but still on temple grounds. And living also on temple grounds, on the grounds of that particular temple, was a group of homeless people whose leader, according to the person who told me about this, who actually was there and witnessed the experience, the whole situation, was no stranger to violence. And the homeless folks felt that the temple was cheating them out of water. And so they accosted this work party, and the leader was right in Hadaroshi's face, right in his face, like inches away from his face, red in the face, screaming, totally, completely enraged at Dosan as a representative of the temple. And again, the person that told me this said that he was holding a shovel because it was some kind of digging detail, and he hung on to it in case he needed to whack the guy with it if he took a swipe at Dosan, which apparently he did not. But what unfolded was marvelous and an expression of what Tori Angie is speaking of. Dosan was clearly present with this man, clearly honoring his humanity, his concern. He wasn't saying anything. He just was increasingly inwardly quiet. And gradually the man began to calm down. And eventually the whole thing was settled, at least temporarily, and the man went away. And that is exactly, as I said, what Tori is talking about. A Buddha manifesting and the Pure Lands coming into being right there and then. We have that capacity. It might be behind a wall of conditioning and negative experience and assumptions about who we are and who somebody else is. But the reality is that it is there. We all have that innate compassion. We all have that innate wisdom. And the more deeply we realize our true nature through our Zen practice, the more this will be manifest. And with the work of the long maturation, which is so vital, and which Tori was so concerned about being essential, then we can little by little manifest it in different ways in our own life, to not only our benefit, but to the benefit of all beings, and particularly whoever it is that we have been challenged by. This is all part of our Zen practice. It's not something that is normally spoken of much in Zen practice, but it's vital. Because Zen practice isn't complete unless we express it in everything we do or say or think. And that's not about telling people, oh, you should do Zen practice. This is about what we realize from within ourselves, the innate compassion rising, the innate wisdom rising, that it becomes manifest. That part of our practice that initially is uncomfortable is the aspect of seeing where we're caught. But I don't know any other way than that in order to be able to work on it. With the combination of Zen practice and seeing where we are caught in greed, anger, and delusion is transformative, or has the potential to be transformative if we work with it in that way. And that's important. And you have seen or heard many times unfortunately, in America for years, about people who are so-called advanced in Zen practice, teaching even, who were being abusive. That's not what Zen is about. Zen is about true liberation, which means liberating your innate compassion and wisdom and manifesting it 24/7, 365 days of the year. This is what we call 360-degree practice here, and it's vital. And our practice is not complete until we are really working on that. The Zendo practice, the extended out breath, the koan work, is about opening us to where we are caught and seeing more clearly and letting go. But it's easily possible to override it. And John Wellwood, who's I believe a clinical psychologist, recognized this decades ago and wrote about it. If you Google him, you could read his writing about people doing what he called end runs around their issues. Because it is possible when things come up, when we see more clearly where we have acted in a way that's maybe not as compassionate as we would like to have, then we can stuff it again. But that would be really, really a shame. Because then it'd be stuck in you again, and you would unwittingly be continuing to act in that way. Whereas if you open your arms and embrace it with radical acceptance and look deeply into the experience, the physical experience in your body of what comes up in the way of sensations when you make that realization, then it can let go. It just basic neuroscience is that when we choose to open and embrace it, recognize it, and not do it again, then our brain is able to respond. The synapse connections are weakened each time we resist doing something, each time we let go of thought. And strengthen, for example, each time we extend our out breath and are open to possibility, totally present. And all of this comes together in a way that we have choices. We can do 360-degree practice if we choose to do so. And I hope everyone here does. This is what Tori Angie realized through deep awakening and wrote about several hundred years ago, because it's vital. So I thank you for listening. Good heavens, we only have 1 minute left. And we will stop now and recite the 4 vows.